So welcome everybody that is currently here. We'll probably get some people that join us later, just because there was a Webster Art Coalition meeting at 1. So I had a couple of people email me ahead of time and let me know that they were going to be at that meeting briefly, and then they might jump back in to join us. Uh, Thank you all for coming to Marcus's lecture today. We got a couple of participants outside of our class this week, so I consider that a win. We're still not quite up to the numbers that are like 70 attendees like we got for some of them last semester, but also like we've been in this pandemic sort of pedagogy world for a while now, and I think people are still having varying levels of tiredness and motivation, which is fine. What did you guys think? So Marcus is a person that I've known for many, many, many years, and he's kind of always been doing some crazy stuff. So yeah, what do you guys think about the work, sort of the impetus of the work, his process? I know not everybody has like a background in sort of chemistry based photography. Do we have like a functioning darkroom at Webster? I think we do. Okay. Yeah. So some of you guys might be a little, at least casually familiar with some of the processes that he was talking about. But if there's anything that I know about, you know, uh, as Marcus referred to, lens-based artists, it is that you can go down the chemistry rabbit hole very fast when it comes to photograph making. So I don't expect everybody to know all of the words that he said in terms of the process with how the images were made, but I think the ideas remain interesting. So what do you guys think? Any questions?
I was thinking, I was like, I wonder if he's ever like gotten in some sort of like legal trouble with like, you know,
Oh, 100%.
yeah.
100%. I don't know that. I don't know the specifics. And who knows, like he potentially could have like had to, sign many non-disclosure agreements
Yeah.
um, to even make certain work. You'll notice like he was showing us images of the CCTV camera based work, the work that he essentially created by hacking into those cameras worldwide. He wasn't giving us the locations or any sort of specific information when he was showing us the information for each image. So there's probably a certain amount of information that he intentionally withholds, specifically to not get into those sort of scenarios. But I think it also works to his benefit that some of those sort of scenarios that in cameras and databases and whatever that he has hacked into are not that hard to hack into. So it's one of those things where they don't want the public to know that he was able to hack into those things quite so easily. So they probably just pretend like it didn't happen, and do not, apply legal action. Or it is one of those things where, if they do come to him with that, I would argue that potentially whoever is on Marcus's legal team would sort of frame the discussion as saying, well, technically we pointed out a hole in your security system. So do you really want to, pursue legal action against someone who just made, a glaring mistake obvious to you? So it's interesting. We sort of talked about paperwork and the like importance of paperwork last week. Like again, legal action and sort of doing due diligence to protect oneself is not something that you typically think of as an artist, but it is something that comes up more often than you think it will. Yeah, I can only assume. I mean, if the man is like trying to get, security clearance for like the CIA, like at Langley, like, yeah, he's he's definitely on a government watch list for sure. Probably many. But it's one of those things. It's like, he goes through the proper channels a lot of just as much as he does sort of, you know, illegal crap. Like he will play nice with the bureaucracy side. I think it's a delicate balance between the two. And a large part of it is that macro level conversation, which is that, he's working sort of collaboratively with, programmers that potentially are at institutions that also set up some of these systems. Like he was talking about programmers and facial recognition programmers in Boston. That's mostly him. I don't know this for a fact, but he's most likely working with people that are going to MIT or like Carnegie Mellon. And a lot of the graduates from those programs, they work for the FBI, they work for the CIA. They are, former graduates of those programs, or the people that like set up these flawed systems. And so now there's new contemporary graduates that are, trying to rectify the errors of the past. So, any other comments or questions? That's a good one. Legal action is a very, very good question.
A thought that I had, like when he was talking more about the landscapes at the beginning, how it kind of made me empathize with the landscapes, like they're being like as if I was personifying them,
Mm-hmm.
like they're being like watched 24/7, and I wouldn't want that. I feel like they're kind of like a person, like they should just be left alone. I don't know.
Yeah, I mean, it does. That is a weird question, right? The relationship of, um, as human beings, we wouldn't like that, but at the same time, it's almost our job to. He talked about being an archivist, right? He sees himself as an archivist from a. From a global warming standpoint, one could argue that the surveillance that's happening, in those public parks, in those cameras, is incredibly important. So when you sort of flip it in that direction, it's like all of that footage that, Marcus is collecting and then going through, like, becomes infinitely like dire because the landscape is changing. And it is shifting over time. And if we weren't in this like authoritarian police state where security cameras were everywhere, we might potentially miss some of the evidence of sort of man's impact on the world and on the landscape that is happening. So it's I know exactly what you mean. It's like I would not want to have like he said the stuff about the nanny cam footage.
Mm-hmm.
That's like hella creepy. So yeah, there's nefarious. The cameras are being used for nefarious purposes, but I think it's also important to sort of ask the question, like, is there some good to it? There has to be. Clementine, stop it. There has to be some initial reason why these cameras were put up, and I don't necessarily think that all of those reasons are bad. He talked about the camera in Florida. It's like they put it up so that like people don't trespass and potentially like damage the public parks, and it's not necessarily hurting anybody because it's not even a camera that works or exists. And yet, like, from sort of a metaphorical standpoint, that is problematic because it's this idea that, like, it doesn't matter if a person is watching. It's a matter of a person could be watching. And in, the larger dialogue, they are. And they're not only watching, they're taking notes. And they're not only taking notes, they're using the information to potentially dictate our experiences of the world. Like we no longer get the same experience of what life is that generations before us have had. And potentially we never will again. I don't know. Has anybody watched The Social Dilemma, the documentary that's on Netflix? Oh, y'all. I highly recommend you watch it because it will definitely bring into light specifically some of the stuff that Marcus was talking about today. Simply because
I actually watched it last night.
You
My
did?
boyfriend had it on, and I was like, "This is so." I was like, "I need something to like fall asleep to," like, and he was like, "Okay, well, I'll put on this
Let's talk
documentary," and it was actually really interesting.
Yeah. I mean, just no spoilers or anything, but I would, the general thing that you might be interested to know is that like a large amount of the people that they interview for that documentary series are people that held very high ranking positions at various social media companies and Silicon Valley level companies who have since like moved on and or quit for various ethical reasons. So I'm not going to spoil anything, but it's definitely worth watching. It brings sort of the topics of discussion that we touched on today into a much more sort of scary and specific light. But did any of you guys grow up without smartphones?
Yeah, my first phone, like, you had to like push the number 1 or the number 2 like 3 times to get C. You know, like with like the keyboard that slides up. But my younger siblings, their first phones were iPhones or like Android smartphones.
Yeah, I mean, it's generationally we're starting to sort of have like a shift between people who have always been exposed to certain types of technology and people, let's say, from my only slightly older generation who like we had this before and after structure. Like not everybody had internet like in their homes when I was growing up. Smartphones didn't exist until like I'd gotten into high school. Like there's a stark difference between the generations that are currently living in terms of technology and technology exposure and the importance of technology. And it's changing everything. And there's a lot of people that think that it's actually having a statistically adverse impact on mental health specifically. And I would argue that that sort of compounded by the pandemic and our reliance on technology during the pandemic is the only way that you actually get to encounter a lot of people face to face. We don't even know sort of the impact that is having on us, even as we speak right now. So, which is one of the reasons why I like to give you guys a break and sort of check in with y'all each week to sort of see how it's going. So at this point, I think I'll ask that question. How's it going? How are the rest of your classes? What are we dealing with? What are we working with? Does anybody need to scream? You can. Your mics are on mute, so won't affect me. Monica's having thoughts.
I'm okie dokie.
Who's okie dokie? Who said that?
Me.
Okay, all right. That's good. I mean, I think, there's, and we'll talk about this when we start to dive into the reading. I think there's strategies to sort of cope with things that are difficult, and I think it's a thing that we're all sort of exercising over the past year and a half now. And a large part of that is sort of like doing resilience work or practicing resilience as a reaction to the things that are sort of happening around us. Anybody else? Did anybody come up with a ritual? New rituals this week? Anybody excited about something that they're working on or a project that they got? You gotta have excitement. If you don't have something to look forward to or to be excited about, what are you even doing?
The Valentine's Day zine.
Valentine's Day zine, what is that? Is that Webster doing this?
Yeah. So I don't know. They were talking about it. I joined like AIGA, so like now I'm in there, so we talk about it a lot, but I don't know, everyone else should do it. I'm gonna make my little idea today. So I'm excited for that.
Yeah. Also, I mean, I was actually thinking about this when I was reading the chapter this morning. How often are you guys like applying to stuff or like submitting artwork to things?
Probably not enough.
Okay, so you said not enough. Monica, have you ever submitted artwork to anything?
Yeah, I just I relate to this reading a lot because I just have like a fear of like doing a lot of stuff and then I just don't do it. But I'm always like, yeah, that'd be cool to do it, and then I'm like I'm like, no, but
Yeah, you got to get over that.
yeah.
Fast. I wonder about this though, because I think about I don't know if it's an institutional thing with Webster or if it's perhaps like I said, one of these like indicators of a generational shift, right? So when I was in undergrad, in the same kind of like art school situation that like you guys are in right now, I applied to a bunch of stuff. Not like big, like heavy, there's no way I'm going to get it type stuff, but there were like little things around or like community based organized events and art spaces and stuff. And I was in like a tiny town that didn't even really have an art scene. So I'm curious as to like if there's just less stuff to apply to, which I think potentially is happening in the pandemic realm that we're in. There's just less stuff to even like try to get. But I mean, pre-pandemic, this was something that I would ask my students, and a lot of the time they would say like, "No, I've never applied to an exhibition before, or I've never applied to a juried show, or I've never applied to an open call." So yeah, I don't really know the answer to that. Like, do you think it's a generational shift where perhaps it's an innate reticence to take that first step? I don't know.
I'm not sure. I don't know. Like I never applied to an exhibition before, but I did like a couple weeks ago, and like I got in. So like I went to visit the art, but like I hadn't seen art in a long time, and I think it was a lot of younger artists who were in it, and there were a lot of older artists. It looked like there was a good mix. So I mean,
Show?
What?
Was it the show at the Foundry?
Yeah.
Yeah, very nice.
So, but I heard of that through Natalie. So, but I don't know. I feel like it's just hard to know where to look for things.
Okay. Well, I mean, can I give you guys a suggestion? Actually, this is going to require me to like copy and paste. Hold on one second. Yeah, I mean, I think that's a thing. That's an excellent question. Because you kind of have to know where to look, right? So, and if nobody tells you, you're just kind of like potentially Googling the wrong like string of words together. Here it is. One of the main most useful websites that I've used ever since I was in undergrad is the website Call for Entry, or Cafe for short. I put it in the chat. I really like that website because it has an algorithm that specifically shows you what the deadlines are that are coming up. It also has subcategories of like regions. So like there are some calls for entry that are, you know, state specific. There are some that are regionally specific, meaning like it might be sort of like a tri-state area or like a 5-state area. And so you can very easily kind of like search and discover what things you can qualify for, because a large part of it is not necessarily selling yourself short or anything, but you also don't want to waste your time. Like you want to set yourself up for success, like you had, Lauren, like you applied and like you said, you got in. So I like that website because you can break everything down into like tangible little bits. And so like if you know that, you know, one of your goals is you want to go on a artist residency, you can literally like unclick all of the boxes and only click residencies. And then from there, you can figure out like where the residencies are, and then when the application is due, and then plan accordingly for that. I think you guys remember last week, Katina said that the vast, you know, it's like once you get outside of academia and you're in the real world, you know, we're doing things like teaching or working a day job in fabrication, or, you know, curating, or graphic design, or what have you. You have a day job. So your actual art practice oftentimes isn't a daily practice per se. Katina did the bulk of her work at artist residencies, which is like unfettered, like devoted time to your art practice. There's a lot of arts professionals that work in that way. So I do think it is important that you guys like look at those types of things and start thinking about that practice now, because it's applying to stuff becomes really important. Which brings us to our reading for the week, which is about like sort of unpacking and tackling the fear that can become associated with trying things or doing things. So Lauren, you applied to and got into a show. What are you going to do with that energy?
I mean, I can relate this to the text that we read.
Mm-hmm.
I feel like it's like a leveling up. Like it was just the right amount of challenge to like get me to the next level, and like I won that little level. So now, I mean, maybe I'll look for other things, or like just like another challenge that's a little bit harder. So
yeah, so that was the sort of section. It was on page 47 of the reading. Urgent optimism.
I really like that section.
Right. Well, yeah, because the other part of the chapter was just like, get used to failing. And you're just like, oh, okay, all right. Well, I guess that's going to be my life. But urgent optimism is this gradual belief that you can succeed. And I highly, highly recommend that you guys sort of foster this idea of piggybacking on your success. But also maintaining resilience in failure. And I'll sort of unpack what I mean by that. Meaning you just got that confidence boost because you got something. So I would recommend that you apply to something else immediately, or start a new project immediately. I have this rule when I get rejection letters. On the day that I get a rejection letter, either from a show or a residency or a job, all of which have happened to me many, 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 many times. On the day that you get that information, you go and you make something, or you apply to something else. And I firmly believe this, and I've been doing it since grad school. And it's because you never want to dwell on your failures, and you never want to give them more importance than they should be given. So it's this idea that you check the email, you are given a piece of data, which is that you didn't make it into this show this time. You don't sit there and you don't dwell and cry about it and sort of wonder and fester in all of the sort of negativity that could come up from that rejection. Instead, you take it in almost from like a Buddhist standpoint, and you say, hello, information, and then you say goodbye, information, and then you just move on to something else. So I think it's incredibly important to make something or apply to something on days that you get rejected. I don't know why it works, but it works really well. I mean, you can make work about your rejection. That's cool, as long as you're doing some sort of like creative or productive action on the same day. I highly recommend. But again, they talked about urgent optimism. It becomes easier, and it becomes easier to believe that you will get something when you've already gotten something. So you had the ultimate high, Lauren, that you just got something, which means that like you have the confidence and the belief that you can get another thing. I think on the days when you get the rejection, it's hard to apply to other things. Like the motivation isn't there. You will do it at half pace. You'll start photoshopping your image for the next application, but it'll take you like 3 hours. Whereas like if you just got something and you apply to another thing, you'll do it like lightning fast. So again, it's like always be chasing something, but you can do it with the urgent optimism, but you can also do it when you're sort of sort of lying in failure as well. And that becomes easier with time. Because Monica, you were talking about how it's difficult, right?
Yeah, I don't know. I think this kind of relates to like the first part of the reading for me, how like I have a fear that, oh, what if I like miss a step in like applying for something, or like what if I mess up really bad, so I just don't do it? Because I don't know, because I've tried to like, I've looked into it in the past, and then I'm like, that's a lot of work, and I don't know if like my brain can do that right now, so I just don't, and then I just forget about it.
So is the pulse of that fear, that's a lot of work, or that's too much work and I don't want to do that if I'm not going to get it?
No, it's just like, what if I do it wrong type of thing? Like, I don't know.
But the general fear is that you won't get it. Because if you do it wrong, you won't get it.
Yeah. I guess so. Yeah.
Yeah, well, no, because that is legitimately my number one fear, is that I will have wasted my time.
Yeah.
Because like they always say in like dumb Wall Street movies, time is money, which is true. In the real world, like legitimately it is. Us as like visual makers and everything, we get paid an hourly rate, and oftentimes in the art we don't get paid a rate that even pays bills or like justifies the amount of work that we did. Like we and even Mark was talking about this, we live in a crazy world with like all kinds of systemic problems and unjust systems. So I think a large part of that, specifically in the art world, like we know that the art world is already like a little hinky and kind of messed up. So we don't want to waste our time, because our time, we individually value our time, which is a good thing. You should value your time, and you should push to receive proper compensation and credit and attention and everything for your time. But there are other factors at play, right? So reminders for you, which is there isn't a single artist in the world that has never received a rejection letter. They often have received more rejections than acceptance. Secondarily, a lot of these shows and things are being jurred and or curated by human beings, which means that those individual human beings are the ones that are making the choices for each of the shows. So do you consider yourself a person that is literally liked by every human being on the planet, Monica?
No. No.
Yeah. Listen, I've been on this world, 30 plus years, and I am an acquired taste. And the thing that I've learned about my artwork is that it is also an acquired taste, which means that not every single show that I apply to is going to be a good fit in terms of what that curator or juror believes. We hold different beliefs. That's the great thing about, being a human being. And the great thing is that eventually, when you guys sort of grow up, you leave Webster and then you become, fully functioning like artist human beings out there in the world, is that every once in a while, somebody gives you the reins. And then all of a sudden you get to be the person who is the juror. You get to be the person who gives out the awards. You get to be the person who says, like, I like all of these people, and that person sucks at drawing. You should never quite say that, but, where we may not feel validated in one instant, the universe will eventually give us a scenario in which we get to validate others. So that's my preachy part of that. So don't let it hinder you like that. We all are going to waste our time, but it's the lottery. You can't win if you don't play. And if you want big things to happen that you never even thought that you could get, then you have to apply those big things. Because you never know if there's going to be a like-minded individual that happens to be the curator at that time. Okay. Yeah, I was sort of interested in how they were attaching fear, like, I guess, creative fear, and that reticence to sort of start a project or apply to things with phobias. Like that's like to use the framework linguistically of phobic behavior, I think is very extreme, but perhaps more accurate than I think of. Because I've been working on like unlearning a lot of stuff for many years. So I think talking to you guys is actually good for me, because it reminds me maybe of like how I used to think, and how sort of paralyzing that can be at times. What else? So we had, we had positives and negatives. I really enjoyed them talking about Thomas Edison's quote. And first of all, Thomas Edison, can we talk about Thomas Edison and Nikola Tesla for a second? Go off. Who's got information for me?
I don't know. I just feel bad that Nikola Tesla like just died alone and stuff. And that dude was going off, and like he did so much, and then everyone was like, "No, love, we're actually not gonna deal with that because
For
you're
those
making
not in the know, Thomas Edison and Nikola Tesla were doing the same research, the same thing, and they applied for patents at the same time. They were doing the same thing, and only one person gets like all of the credit and gets quoted constantly in history books, and like put on a pedestal for the end of time, and poor Nikola Tesla had to die alone and derelict. But I do want to point that out because, yeah, sometimes the world can be unfair. And I swear to God, you guys are, if you continue making and creating things for long enough, you're going to meet and or at least become aware of the person who makes the work that looks, sounds, and is about everything that you make work about. Like legitimately, you will meet the person, or you will like see them on Instagram, or you will eventually be shown the person that is the doppelganger of the work that you make. And you can either choose to be bummed about it and like just be like, well, I guess there's no point in me making the work anymore because that person was written up in art forum, and I'm just sitting here with no recognition. You can choose to think that you're the Tesla in that situation, or you can embrace the idea that you have a kindred spirit out there, and just be pleased that you're not alone in your way of thinking, right? I can tell you right now, I have had multiple doppelgangers be introduced to me who have made work that is similar to the work that I made in undergrad, similar to the work that I made in graduate school, and even the work that I make now. Fun fact, Brian Zimmerman and I make almost identical work. I did not know this until I gave my first artist lecture at Webster, and Brian came up to me later, handed me his business card, and then I later went home and looked at his website, and then I was just like, oh no, what just happened? This does not mean that like me and Brian have to fight to the death. We are not going to duel. Instead, we decided to embrace the fact that we have similar ideas, and he's become a trusted colleague and a person that I talk to about my work. So I do want to point that out about Tesla and Edison. That's a major sidebar, but it's definitely something that I feel deserves a little bit of attention. But what they were talking about is the Edison quote, which is the real measure of success is the number of experiments that can be crowded into 24 hours. So I wrote down a question that I want to pose to all of you. How many things did you try today? In one form or another? It's not a fun question to ask yourself. Like, I'm just, none of you guys have your microphones on, but I'm just gonna imagine and start saying things that might be running through your brain right now, which is just like, I didn't try anything today. Like, I don't even know if I brushed my teeth today. Like, you're probably also going into a self-effacing language spiral that perhaps is like, well, like, what am I even doing if I didn't do anything today? You're like about to guilt yourself into the things that you didn't do. Well, the bright side is that today is not over, and that there's plenty of time to try something out. But I do want to urge you guys to start asking yourself that question on a daily basis. Not to guilt yourself. Obviously, everybody needs like time for self-care and, all of those things. But I think there's a surprising thing that will happen when you start asking yourself that question daily. You'll actually start giving yourself credit for the things that you do. And a large part about sort of building resilience and getting over fear is that practice, right? Because when you start to think that you're capable of doing something, it becomes easier. And I think a large part of that will be this daily practice of giving yourself credit for the things that you accomplish, and gratitude. I'm Okay, first of all, I want to gush real quick because like I just picked up this book randomly. It was on like a list of books. They were like books that every artist should have. Like it might as well have been like a BuzzFeed like clickbait article last semester. And so I was just like, all right, click, click, click. And I bought like 7 books. I hadn't touched this one yet when I gave you guys that reading. And I pleasantly surprised with the chapter that we just read. One of which is specifically, they talk about Brene Brown. Do you guys know Brene Brown in her research? Oh my God. Okay, so I don't know if I'm going to give you guys a reading for next week. I think I might give you a prompt and then I might show you guys some videos. Are you guys open to like video homework? Okay. All right. Because I got some TED Talks that I've watched recently that are pretty great. And I mean, they're easy and fun. Brene Brown is she is a researcher and storyteller that specifically her field of interest, she is a researcher and educator at I think it's the University of Texas in Houston, but she works she's a social worker and works at the university there, but her primary focus of her research is vulnerability and shame. And they referred to her research in this book, which is, they talk about sort of resilience as it pertains to creativity and sort of functioning as like a successful creative individual. But that research not only applies to creativity, but it actually applies to basically functioning as a human being and happiness. So one of the largest things is that you are able to foster and cultivate shame resilience. Does anybody know the difference between shame and guilt?
I feel like in my head I'm like, oh, those are different, but I can't explain why. But I feel like shame is like something maybe like you feel because of how others tell you you're supposed to feel, whereas guilt is more personal, like, oh, you did something that now you feel bad about personally.
I mean, that's kind of digging into it. So the reason why I'm a giant nerd and kind of obsessed with Brene Brown's research is because I do think that it has massive implications, not only to creativity and to like being a human being in general, but like I personally think that it will like save lives. I also think that she's pairing with other researchers in a couple of different fields to help undo racial inequality in a variety of fields. But she describes the difference between guilt and shame in the easiest way possible, which is guilt is I did something bad. Or in the case of the reading that we went over, guilt would be I failed. Shame is I am bad or I am a failure. You see the difference? One is an action. It is potentially a one-off or a choice, whereas the other one is equating it to who you are as an actual human being. So apparently, so guilt is a singular incident, whereas shame is like a personality trait. And so fostering shame resilience or sort of trying to tackling shame in your life and how you apply it to how you think about yourself is one of the things that you have to practice really, really hard. And I would say that shame resilience also goes into the discussion of how do you get better at dealing with failure. Because I know me personally, I have that little voice inside of me that every time I get a rejection letter that just tells me to stop, that I need to stop trying, that I'm not good enough, that there's a reason why I keep failing, and that's because like I inherently am flawed and I'm not a good enough artist and people don't understand me, or I'm not a good enough maker. Like all of those things spiral through my head when I get a rejection letter. But I've been practicing this idea of, you know, of fear and shame resilience, where I don't allow myself to think those things for very long, or I put them on trial. You know, I'll have the one thought like I'm not good enough, and then whenever I have that thought, I then meet that thought with another thought, which is that true? And then I go back and I think about the things that my peers and my colleagues have told me about my artwork, and the conversations that I have had with them where they said like, I really love your work because of X, Y, and Z. This thing resonates with me. Like, I really enjoyed when you did that. And it's this little baby practice that you do in your mind where you remind yourself that the things that pass through your mind are not truths. They are thoughts. And some thoughts are true and some are wrong. And that's sort of a part of what it is to be human. But anyways, yeah, Brene Brown breaks it down hella simply. And I've been kind of obsessed with her for like the past year. She's got a lot of like audiobooks on Audible. She does some TED Talks and things. She also has a podcast if you're interested in like podcasts and you want to listen to like weekly stuff that goes into some of these topics. Highly recommend. But yeah, I really like this book because it started to make those connections with creativity. Because again, and some of you guys took art form with me last semester, but I don't have a photographic memory, so I don't know which people took part in which conversation last semester, because we had a lot of them. But I think it is important to think about these things, like, what was the guy's name that like told or is like concerned about people drawing or being able to draw and pick up the marker? Drawing confidence. What was that guy's name? It was in the latter half. Dan Rome, the author of The Back of a Napkin, an expert on art and visual thinking, says roughly 25% of business people he works with are reluctant to even pick up a marker. He calls them the red pen people. And another 50% are yellow pen people and are only comfortable highlighting or adding details to other people's drawings. I think this is like kind of important stuff because it's tackling the myth of the creative genius. It's that idea of saying like, oh, and I experience this on a daily basis where I talk to non-creatives, and they pin it down in this chapter because it's the first thing that a non-creative will say to you when you say that you're an artist is they say, "Oh, I can't draw." I'm looking at your faces. All of you are like nodding.
Yeah, that's what I was gonna say. Like it doesn't. It's not like a pet peeve. It's like I understand where they're coming from. It's just like sometimes I love drawing with people, just like sitting and doodling and making funny jokes, and immediately people will be like, "Oh, I can't draw." I'm like, "Yeah, I'm not asking you to make something so great, but I understand how they're scared."
Yeah,
you know, because I get that too. But yeah.
But then they're also like, oh, you're so good at drawing. I wish I could do that. I'm like, I'm 21. I've been taking like drawing lessons and like drawing classes since like 6th grade. No one starts like this. Like that shouldn't stop you from doing it just because you're not as good as you think you should be.
I know. Don't you find it a little bit insulting? Like Emily, you've had all this training, like you've taken, however many art classes, you've been tutored by whoever. It's a little bit insulting for them to just be like, oh my God, I wish I could draw. You're just so inherently good at it. You didn't put in hours or anything like that. I used to, when people would be like, oh no, I can't do that, I can't draw, I would also, like, I have a sculpture background, so I would be like, cool, neither can I. Which isn't true. I can, because I took a lot of classes to teach me how to draw. I wasn't always there. I had an interest in it. I think people confuse this idea of ability with interest. They think that the people who maybe inherently have an interest in drawing or an interest in art from the get-go are the people who have like some magical creative genius that was bestowed on them by a fairy that came in through a window one night. When in actuality, what they're talking about is like, perhaps you have always been interested in art and you've pursued it. But I do think that it negates all of the work that goes into it. Well, and it also, it points at potential. It says potentially more about that person than it says about you, right? So, what did they talk about? The creative wound. You guys remember that part of the reading? Okay, so it's this idea that at some point, there you may encounter a person. A lot of the non-creative types, if you sort of press them on the issue and you ask like why they don't do creative things, oftentimes they will point to an incident with a parent or a teacher or someone who potentially has said something negative in response to their innate and natural curiosity and creativity, like at some point in their formation, which sort of like it becomes a little bit it becomes a sticking point and something that's very important, especially if any of you guys are thinking about becoming educators at some point, but also in a broad sense further down the line, if you guys are ever thinking about having children or having any type of relationship with children, because how you respond to their creative endeavors can be formative. If you say the wrong thing at the wrong time to a child, you could crush how they view themselves creatively for the rest of their life. Because a lot of the time they will in terms of the reading, they will crush the clay horse and throw it back in the bucket and then never try to make anything ever again. And that's because, like I said, you have to like learn resiliency. Children don't have that at first. So it's important to sort of like be cognizant of that, aware, and then choose how you interact with people. This is also, you guys have been in critiques before. Have you ever been in a critique with someone who is purely critical, but does not add the constructive part to their criticism? You don't have to name any names, but it happens. I've been guilty of doing that before. It's like if I slept on the wrong side of the bed and I go into like a Sculpture 1 critique, or if I'm just like, potentially just like mad that I feel like they didn't work hard enough, like that could very easily result in me taking it out on like some poor unsuspecting sculpture student. But I'm aware of the ramifications of what can happen when you don't add constructive aspects to your criticism. And there's a reason why we sort of like at least attempt to create a safe space where all criticism at least has like a constructive Socratic dialogue attached to it in academia. This is why. And it's because like we don't want to crush your spirit. But eventually, you know, you guys are going to graduate. Some of you relatively soon. You have to figure out how to do that internally for yourself. And it's a lot easier for other people to remember to be constructive with their criticism than it is for you to remember to be constructive with your criticism with yourself.
That just made me realize that I've like never done that to myself. I've never done, whenever I critique anyone else's work for like a class, I always like start with like a compliment and then give like constructive feedback, you know, but I never do it myself. I just like tear myself apart, and I'm never like, okay, well, how can I improve? I'm just like, that looks bad.
Mm-hmm. Or like just pointing out the parts that are working, because there is, you know, like, okay, so maybe like your composition like isn't exactly where it needs to be, but your color palette is on point. You know what I mean? Like the colors are working. It's just maybe you need to change the subject matter to better like work with the things that are working. But it's not just applied creatively, you guys. And I'm just learning this midlife, which is that oftentimes we live our entire lives never giving ourselves the constructive part. We will tear ourselves down in creative capacities, in relationship capacities, in friendships, in our schooling, in jobs. We will do the criticism part, but we don't do the constructive part that acknowledges what is good, gratitude, and the part that, you know, potentially needs work. A lot of the time people will just ignore the part that needs work because they place judgment on it. And maybe it seems like too hard to fix, or they are living or approaching it from a place of shame where they think that it's not a thing that can be fixed. They just think that it's simply who they are. So that's why I do want to bring, like, y'all, I was expecting this like chapter to be crap, and then I read it and I was like, ooh, we got a lot to talk about today. Yeah, so I think it's important to think about these things from a creative standpoint, but also like I did want to point out that it's macro level thinking. This is like retraining your brain to become a more resilient human being. In every aspect. And a large part of it is like, yeah, give yourself credit. Choices are choices. Just because you make bad choices every once in a while, creatively or in life, doesn't mean that you are a bad person. Doesn't mean you're a bad artist. You have the opportunity to change next time, and to do better. And really the only thing that would hold you back from doing that is if you don't do, and you're paralyzed by fear. I think it's important that there are people out there that are challenging the notion of like, what is it to draw? How complicated is drawing really? What does it say about whether you pick the marker up or not? And then actively working to try to get more people to pick up the marker. Like that's how innovation is going to happen, is if more people sort of conquer this fear, and are willing to be dumb, share an idea, look stupid, have conversations that are difficult to have, including Clementine. She's got a lot to say. One of the quotes that was in here, which is, whenever you fall on the art, or wherever you fall on the artistic skill curve, half of the battle is is to resist judging yourself. And I've said this many, many times. Your job is not to judge. That is someone else's job. That is for an art critic. That is for a curator. That is for a juror. That is not your job. Your only job is to make things. Not to judge them, not to say whether they're good or bad, just to do it. Just to show up every day and to do it. And a large part of it is, we call it an art practice for a reason. It's because, we have to practice it. We are not just inherently artsy people. They like to use that word too, artsy. No one is inherently artsy. We are people who pursue art. So go out and try things today. Come back and let me know what you tried. I think one of the homework assignments that they talked about this woman. They talked about this woman who apparently one of her art assignments that she gives people is that she has them make a failure resume. And so that is because you have to acknowledge failure. And because you have to acknowledge failure, I think there's something about acknowledging it that sort of takes some of the sting away from it. So for homework this week, I'm going to give you guys, like I said, probably not reading homework. I'll give you guys like some TED Talks and some videos. But as far as like writing homework or like a prompt, I want you guys to make me a fail resume. What'd you guys fail at? And you can format it however you like. Think outside the box if you want to. You can think very inside the box and actually make it in the form of a resume. It can be however you want to interpret both the term failure and the term resume is up to you. Does anybody have any questions?
So we're just talking about things we've done in our life that we've failed at?
Yep.
Okay.
Yep. And so it can be micro level small or really big. Just keep in mind that we are going to talk about it in class. So if it's something you don't want to talk about, that's okay. You can put it on the assignment and then just give us the caveat of like, there are certain things that you don't want to talk about in the thing. That's fine too. But I want this to just be an exercise for you guys to think about failure in a way that isn't like traumatizing. To sort of think about it, process it, but also to just realize all of the things that you've overcome. And that if you can handle all of those things, then you can definitely handle, what's going to happen. So this is our first exercise in rejection and fear resilience. And I hope you guys try to have fun with it. I don't think there are enough pages in the world for me to tell you guys about all of my failures. But I will tell you that most of my failures usually lead me to even greater successes. So keep that in mind. With everything you fail, there's something that you learn. And usually learning that thing will lead you to a way cooler place. All right. But keep in mind, we had some people that could not attend today. So I'm going to be posting the recording of today, but also just like a brief reminder of homework and stuff on the discussion boards. I'll try to get that posted before end of day on Sunday, like I normally do. Does anybody have any questions for me about anything? Everybody doing okay? We made it to Friday again. What is it, week 3? Week 3? I'm teaching a 4-week sculpture class. or no, not 4 week, 8 week. So like our next critique is next week. Like we're already finishing up. We're at the halfway point. It's crazy. I don't even understand how it's happening. All right. Well, I'm going to let you guys go for this week. As always, I have my email open and try to get back to you guys as quickly as possible. If you have any questions, if you need any help about anything really. Does anybody know if we have open studio hours at VAS yet for the weekends? Or are we still only Monday through Friday?
I asked Noriko about that, and she emailed Ryan, and as of Monday, I think she emailed me Monday and said it's still during the weekdays.
It's a bummer.
Yeah, but I think she told me Ryan's trying to find somebody for the weekends to monitor.
Yeah. So if anybody is interested in, well, first of all, if anybody is a work study student, we do have hours that are available within the art department. Please go see Alex about that. But if you also are just interested in potentially working as a weekend monitor or a weekday monitor in a variety of the art departments, also go see Alex, because we also have budget hours that are not specifically work study that are available. She told me to tell people in the classes.
I have a question.
Money, do it.
Yeah, so is it like you get paid, or does it go like into your tuition?
So work study, I think they get paid, but it goes towards their tuition.
Okay.
But it's like the student gets paid, and then it's toward it. Those funds are meant to be used towards the tuition for the school or for supplies for the school. Now, if you are a budget employee, which we have, I don't know how many hours available per week for our budget. You'd have to ask Alex. That's just a paycheck. That just means that you are getting a paycheck out of the art department's budget. So there's like no strings attached to that. Anybody can qualify for that. So if you're looking for a part-time job and that sounds pleasant, oftentimes it's like you sit at that front table and you like take people's temperature, or you are a studio monitor for one of the labs. So you're essentially getting paid to kind of like keep an eye on things, but really you're kind of getting paid to do your own homework, essentially. So keep that in mind. If you have any questions, if you're interested in that, email Alex Pierce in the Hunt House, and she will get you more information about that. If you are a part of the AIGA, our speaker next Friday for the lecture series is going to be one of our graphic design speakers. We are having each of the graphic design speakers that are participating in the lecture series this semester. Are actually inviting, or they were invited to give a lecture by former Webster AIGA alumni. So Noriko did this really cool thing where she reached out to former design alums from Webster and asked them questions like, what do you wish we would have had a speaker on, when you were a student, or who is a mentor that, guided you right after you graduated from Webster in the design field. So we've got specifically not only lectures that were introduced via those questions in that sort of forum, but we also have the alumni who are going to be introducing them each week. So you guys will sort of get to see like into your futures in a way of the type of jobs and titles and whatever that you guys might actually have once you graduate Webster too. So, which I'm a giant nerd, and I always think that it's interesting to see how things, carry out in life. You never know what kind of job you could get in the design field until you see another person who has already done it ahead of you. So cool. All right, I feel like I've been talking for like 8 hours. Okay. All right. I hope you guys have a great weekend. Try again, like I said, when you're doing the homework, when you're making your failure resume, try to have it be a positive experience, and not allow the gremlins to take hold in your brain when you're thinking of those things, because the gremlins will try, and the whole exercise is to exercise the gremlins out of your brain. Yeah, the whole point is to see the things that you've overcome. Right? Have a good weekend. Go do something fun, pet an animal, and I'll see you next week.
Bye. Thank you.
Thank you.